Megumi Fushiguro, the Potential Man, Agent 007, 0 feats, 0 relevance, 7 kamikaze attempts. At first glance, Megumi seems incredibly boring. He doesn't say much, doesn't have that much screen time, and serves as your stereotypical rival to the main character, without a personality. But anyone who's watched Jujutsu Kaisen knows how compelling he is, even though, on paper, he shouldn't be. Today I want to discuss why exactly that is by going over what makes Megumi one of, if not the most popular characters in Jujutsu Kaisen. The first time we see Megumi is at the start of Yuji's journey, but his own story starts way earlier. His mother passed away shortly after his birth, and at some point his father, Toji Fushiguro, married another woman who had a daughter who from that point on was Megumi's stepsister, Tsumiki. However, pretty much as early as he can remember, their parents had abandoned them. Until around the age he turned 6, he and Tsumiki were alone. Megumi formed a strong bond with her, and his life goal essentially became making her happy. This is when a teenage Satoru Gojo appeared and confronted him with his past and possible future. He learns that the only reason he was born in the first place was so that he could be a bargaining chip for his father, who had planned to sell him to the Zenin clan. When asked what he wanted to do with his future, he said that it didn't matter, as long as his sister was happy. From then on, Gojo became Megumi's mentor and benefactor for the next 10 or so years. Not much is known about this time, but what we can say for sure is that he learned the basics of his technique from Gojo, and he was taking on a couple of missions by him as well. He attended and probably graduated high school along with Tsumiki. Here he often beat up bullies, which ended up getting him scolded by his sister, and at some point in the last 2 years before the story begins, Tsumiki fell into a coma. After this, he joined Jujutsu High. During his time here, he got to know all the second years a little and continued training his curse techniques as well as curse energy refinement. Upon joining the school, he was ranked as a grade 2 sorcerer, which meant he was sent on missions all by himself. One day he was tasked with retrieving a dangerous special grade cursed object, one of Sukuna's fingers. This is how he got to meet and save Yuji. During the mission they had to fight against multiple curses and were about to lose. As a last resort, Yuji consumed Sukuna's finger. This allowed them to win the fight, but also meant that Yuji had to be exorcised according to the regulations of a Jujutsu society. After Gojo showed up, however, Megumi expressed a personal request. He asked to go against these regulations and not let Yuji die. Gojo, as we know now, obliged. Soon after, Megumi was recruited to the school and the squad was complete. Outside of missions, Megumi always seems more reserved than them. He doesn't let himself and his personality shine through. And during missions, he seems incredibly cold-hearted towards strangers and only cares about completing the mission or protecting his friends. During the cursed womb arc, for example, he brushes aside the corpse of a curse's victim in favor of continuing the mission, not seeing the value in bringing the victim's mother a form of closure by retrieving her son. Unlike Yuji, who insists on doing so. And while they have their little squabble, a special grade curse carrying one of Sukuna's fingers appears. During this fight we get a first look at his strength, which is not much to speak of in comparison to the finger bearer, since he isn't even able to move due to the sheer power of the special grade curse. But with the help of the Shikigami and Yuji, he's at least able to save Nobara. Once they manage to flee the detention center, he opts out of leaving and decides to go back to try and help Yuji, who stayed behind to let Sukuna deal with the curse. He does this even though he knows he can't do much. All of this ends in him fighting Sukuna and losing pretty badly. He ends up sacrificing one of his Shikigami and Yuji dies, but something he learns from this battle is that he underestimates himself severely, as Sukuna believes he has the potential to defeat special grade curses. One of the main things holding Megumi back is himself, and he realizes that more and more throughout the story. Then he meets Aoi Todo, who asks him about his taste in women, and Megumi immediately thinks of his sister. This tournament puts the students of Tokyo's and Kyoto's Jujutsu Academies against each other in a battle-oriented competition where they're able to show off their skills and techniques. Megumi showcases his fighting and tactical ability against Kamo. Something that is portrayed pretty well here is the fact that Megumi will keep getting stronger as the story progresses, because he will have access to more and more Shikigami and gain a better understanding of their powers. Once Hanami shows up and disrupts the tournament, it's clear that Megumi is outmatched. He tries to fight the curse nonetheless. We see that he's willing to fight and even sacrifice himself for the survival of his peers. Through his curse technique, the 10 Shadows, he basically has 10 Pokemon to tame, and we kinda expect him to unlock more and more of these as time goes on, giving Megumi more possibilities as he grows stronger, and exactly that happens. During his fight with Hanami, he sees himself as the first line of defense and is willing to protect his friends even at the cost of his own life. Up until this point, Megumi has been pretty static as a character, and we also haven't seen that much of him. This however changes during the Yasuhachi Bridge mission. People who visited this bridge have been going missing lately, and the reason for this is believed to be a curse. The trio are assigned with this mission and they start gathering information at Megumi's old school. Everything goes as planned until they discover that Sumiko is also one of the people who visited the bridge. In this moment, we get to see Megumi truly worried for the first time. There are actual stakes, something more important to him than even his own life. His sister's safety is on the line. As they learn more about the curse, they quickly realize that this mission is far more difficult than they had anticipated, so they should wait for help. But Megumi doesn't have time. The longer they wait with exercising the curse, the higher the risk of Tsumiki getting attacked by it. So he decides to take the mission on by himself, without telling the others. Being Megumi's friends though, they don't let that happen. So him, Nobara, and Yuji start the mission together. But in the end, he faces off against the special grade curse all by himself. The curse was just like in the detention center, but instead of freezing up, he actually fights the damn thing. He's quickly outmatched, but instead of just giving up, he decides to be selfish for once. This allows him to surpass his self-set limitations and he manages to partially expand his domain, Chimera Shadow Garden, allowing him to defeat the Finger Bearer. Now comes the Shibuya incident, devastating to all parties involved, but nonetheless, Megumi manages to apply what he learned and becomes a valuable asset. He shows his tactical thinking in his fight together with Yuji by discovering how the opponent's curse technique works. In the fight against Daga, he was basically the only reason everyone had a fighting chance because he engaged in a domain battle. And lastly, he held his own against Toji by creatively using the 10 shadows and evasive maneuvers. In the end, we learn what was holding Megumi back. It was his technique itself. More specifically, Mahoraga. A Shikigami so strong that no user in the history of the 10 shadows technique had ever managed to tame it. He can involve his opponent in the summoning ritual in which Mahoraga only disappears upon victory or defeat. This was his trump card. A monster so strong it had the potential to defeat someone like Gojo. So Megumi's thought process must have been, in the worst case, I'll sacrifice myself to defeat the opponent, which blocked him from ever reaching his limit. He had never actually risked his life in battle, because of Mahoraga, except for one time. When fighting the Finger Bearer, he was about to summon him, but decided against it, and it paid off massively for his personal growth. To understand Megumi, we need to understand his goals and motivation. We need to know what Megumi's endgame is. The issue here is that he doesn't have an endgame. If the story were to progress as it is, Megumi would just work as a sorcerer until he dies. A goal he could have would be to get his sister out of a coma and make her life livable for her, but aside from that, the only thing possibly driving him would be protecting his friends. Now we can go into a bit more depth on some scenes that really shine through for Megumi and define him as a person. The first main aspect that I want to address is his compassion for the people close to him, since it may not be very apparent because Megumi is pretty blunt at times. He seems like a typical depressed and rude kid, but I think his main struggle is expressing himself. Because Yuji and Nobara are very goofy, he's essentially forced to be the only serious one in the group, so he drives the missions forward. The best example being the detention center. Once they enter the domain, their escape route disappears, and while Yuji and Nobara were hilariously helpless, Megumi provided a solution. He's reliable and doesn't struggle with finding his purpose, but not for the reason you may think. Megumi does not have a purpose in life, but that doesn't stop him from living. He's not really passionate about anything, but that doesn't seem to bother him at all. Sure, he wants to protect his friends and family, and wants to get stronger to do so, but he doesn't have this inherent selfishness that drives people like Gojo to become stronger. After Yuji's supposed death, he was sad, but more than that, he was driven to become stronger, because he blamed himself for being too weak to save Yuji. If he was stronger, he could have held off Sukino or defeated the special grade by himself. He may not have cried, but he showed his grief in other ways because he essentially tried to keep a part of Yuji alive. After his death, he decided to talk to the mother of the victim they found inside the detention center, even though he said it didn't matter. This either shows us how much Yuji meant to him, or it's just a way of fulfilling his last wish, or it shows us that Megumi changed in a way, and he does care about people, even strangers. This may seem small, but another sentimental moment was when he cooked the meatballs Yuji taught him how to make. From this, it seems like his way of grieving is remembering the fallen and honoring their wishes, but also working towards never letting the same mistake happen ever again. And so, getting stronger is what he has to do, not for himself, but for the people he loves, especially his sister. While we're on this topic, it's pretty important to mention how integral Tsumiki is to Megumi's character. For the longest time, she pretty much was the only tangible motivation for him. The only reason he even agreed to become a sorcerer in the first place was because he believed it would allow her to be happy. She was his only family at that point, and now that she's in a coma, he has more people in his life that are important to him. She's not mentioned that often, but if she's in danger, Megumi will do anything in his power to protect her, as seen during the Yasuhachi Bridge mission. And after it's completed, we see that he isn't just protective of her, but also of his friends like Yuji and Nobara. He knew that the mission was going to be dangerous, but he needed to complete it anyway. Instead of taking them with him, he tried to take it on himself. So even when it's about a sister, he is not willing to compromise on the safety of his friends. After it's done, he figures out the entire incident was most likely caused by the rebirth of Sukuna. So, because Yuji ate the finger, people are dying. Megumi knows how much the death of innocent people weighs on his mind, and he would blame himself for that. So he and Nobara decide to keep this information from Yuji, which didn't really matter since Sukuna was there to make him feel bad anyway. In this moment, Yuji actually tells Sukuna to not tell Megumi about this, since he might blame himself because he was the one that saved Yuji in the first place when they first met. I know this video is about Megumi, but it's just a really cool moment the way they unknowingly try to protect each other from blaming themselves for what Sukuna is responsible for. I'm the one with the least to lose, that's why I can't be the first one to fall. At first, this statement confused me, and also confirmed what I theorized previously. Megumi knows that he doesn't have a lot to live for. If he were to die, there wouldn't be much lost, in his eyes at least. To understand this statement, we have to look at the situation he's in. The students are fighting a special grade curse, so it's a life or death situation. Megumi has just been hit by an attack that nearly renders him incapacitated. He decides to try and fight anyway to protect his friends. I interpret his statement as follows. He doesn't have much to lose, which is why he decides to stand in front of Maki and fight although he shouldn't. The reason he can't be the first one to fall is because if he's gone, then there's no one to protect the others who can't afford to die. So, the point is that he can't allow himself to let anyone except for himself die. This insistence most likely stems from having witnessed Yuji's death, which is why he never wants to experience the same thing again. In this scene, it's easy to recognize Megumi's self-sacrificial nature. Maybe it's because of Mahoraga or just who he is, but at this point he doesn't seem to value his own life all that much, explicitly because he doesn't have that much to live for. The drive to become stronger also stems from what Gojo told him when he was a kid. You better get strong enough to keep up with me. Gojo made Megumi's strength and improvement a requirement for thriving in this world and achieving his goals. Personal strength being the end-all be-all is something that holds true in nearly every aspect of Jujutsu Kaisen. If you're strong, you get what you want, and if you don't, you weren't strong enough. When it comes to getting stronger, Megumi's biggest enemy is himself. He and his sacrificial nature would stop him from evolving. The potential of most curse techniques, and especially Megumi's, are determined by their interpretation and what the sorcerer thinks they can do with it. Keeping Mahoraga as a trump card is detrimental to his growth because it establishes that the most Megumi can amount to is a suicidal Hail Mary to defeat an overwhelmingly powerful opponent. To have this easy way out essentially prevented him from ever reaching his limit and thus never let him surpass them and unlock his potential. It hindered the imagination of his technique and his abilities as a sorcerer, and I think Gojo said it best himself. Dying to win and risking death to win aren't the same thing. To be strong by yourself, you also have to be selfish, and that's impossible if your first response to a seemingly unbeatable opponent is a self-sacrifice. And the one time he was pushed to his limit without getting saved and without summoning Mahoraga, he absolutely cooked. He literally and figuratively went crazy. This was his Black Flash, his moment of growth. His fight with the special grade showcased a glimpse of his power once he stops holding himself back. In Shibuya, we get to see the permanence of these changes. He is stuck to his newfound selfishness. He doesn't jump the gun on Mahoraga and goes through the entire incident without sacrificing himself. Until, of course, this guy shows up. Many people say this as a meme, but I can't let the slander go on any longer. Megumi has always used Mahoraga as a last resort and never considered just throwing his life away for nothing, but let's go over every time he attempts it just to prove this point. He tried it a total of 6 times since I'm not counting his fight against Todo. 3 times he tried it against Sukuna, and all of these were instances where he would have died regardless, so not summoning Mahoraga here would have been just carelessly letting Sukuna live on. Another time he considered it was against Hanami, and once again he did not really have an option there. The strength of the sorcerers was depleted, and if not for Todo and Yuji, they would have all been defeated. Plus, he knew that Gojo was coming, he could have most likely handled Mahoraga, so you could argue that he would have just used it to stall time. Now we come to the fight with the Finger Bearer. He thought about it, but then decided against it because he actually believed he could win and survive. He wasn't sure of it, but since the situation wasn't completely hopeless, he decided against it. Now comes the Shibuya incident. Against Dagon, he explicitly chose to fight without Mahoraga, as he told Nanami he didn't intend on dying in the fight. So he held his own until Toji appeared. And as a truly last resort, he tried it against Toji after fighting him for a while and his last gambit failing. He had pretty much no cursed energy left and also was wounded, so he had no other way of defeating him. But then that problem solved itself. And the one time he actually went through with it was right after fighting Toji and getting stabbed in the back. If Megumi hadn't been completely exhausted here, he would have won against Haruta, who was not that strong. But given the circumstance, he would have lost to him, so summoning Mahoraga here would at least take Haruta down with him. Megumi is a very logical person, and that's why I think he actually considers all the options before Mahoraga, because he doesn't just want to throw his life away. So the only times he tried it was when he was gonna die anyways. Megumi is the Deuteragonist of Jujutsu Kaisen, and also a fan favorite. I mean, I can easily understand why. He has an interesting technique, an appealing design, and he leaves us in anticipation for what part he plays in the story. Overall, I love Megumi as a character, but personally, I feel like he's incomplete. As a person and a character, it feels like he's missing something, because as it seems, the only reason he does anything is to protect the ones closest to him. One reason why I like Megumi is because he's pretty grounded in reality and acts logically. This is mostly because he doesn't have any absurd ideal that motivates him or a strict moral compass he has to follow, and he just reacts to his surrounding circumstances and doesn't even shy away from killing his opponent if it means reaching his goals. In most situations, he considers all the options and acts accordingly. He isn't swayed too much by pure emotions, but just enough so that he doesn't seem like a robot. Even so, we get to see that there's much more to him. He acts normal most of the time, and as a Jujutsu sorcerer, that's kind of weird, because I feel like you gotta be at least a little crazy for that job. But there is a good reason for this. When he isn't pushed to his absolute limit, Megumi is normal. He never chose to be a sorcerer, but I don't think he actually wants to quit. I believe he enjoys saving people and doing good, because if he truly wanted to, he could probably quit, but he doesn't. And he also never really complains about being a sorcerer, so even though he didn't have a choice to begin with, he doesn't seem to dislike it. But Megumi's existence is an interesting contrast to sorcerers like Gojo, who chase strength, or Yuji, who has really idealistic motives. While Yuji would like to save everyone, Megumi chooses who he saves. He doesn't have any obligation to do good, but when he comes across someone like Yuji and does decide to save them, he gives it his all. His behavior outside of life or death missions is very telling of his character as well. He's willing to stick up for his friends even when it doesn't matter that much. He's always helpful and, like I said, reliable. This may seem trivial, but he provides the trio of answers to any questions and he tries to solve problems. He may be serious, but not serious to the point where he can't mess with him, because they do it all the time and he may react rudely, but I think he enjoys being around his friends more than they are a nuisance to him. The Culling Game is basically a free-for-all battle royale for newly awakened sorcerers that forces each player to fight and kill to survive, and it's important to know that Megumi's sister is in it. Megumi's intelligence is a very prominent feature of his. Almost all of his victories are achieved through outsmarting his opponents, he rarely just overpowers them. This is conveyed by the fact that he almost effortlessly figures out the sometimes pretty complicated curse techniques of his opponent, like he did in the Shibuya incident with the opponent who had the ability to reverse the strength of any attack. He had very few clues, but still figured it out in the heat of battle, or when fighting another sorcerer whose ability had something to do with the constellation of stars. But the Culling Game as a whole allowed him to prove his tactical thinking ability. He managed to analyze the game quickly and formulate a plan to find the people they needed, save Tsumiki and free Gojo, with the few resources available. He also showcased his battle IQ in a fight by waiting to use Demon Dog Totality at an opportune moment when his opponent didn't expect it, but also shone a light on the glaring weakness of his sister. To avoid spoilers, I'm not going to go into much detail, but it revealed that Megumi is human. He makes mistakes when it comes to people close to him. It's very fitting for him and doesn't feel expected or like a cheap twist that he was foolish in this case. even though he has shown time and time again that he cares for the details and will consider even pretty minute things to make sure all goes well. Another thing that I want to touch on again is his distinctiveness from people like Yuji. It's the fact that he isn't afraid to kill. He himself is aware of this and even mentions that he would be willing to kill at least 20 people if it means saving his sister. Megumi's importance to the overarching story also shouldn't be understated. He is one of the main characters and of high interest to Sukuna. In and of himself, he doesn't have a set goal he can actually work towards before the Culling Game, except for getting stronger. But once they start, he's the driving force behind the entire plan revolving it, since he desperately wants to save his sister and also free Gojo. Overall, he's a very important piece in the puzzle that is the story of Jujutsu Kaisen, since without him there, many major plot developments wouldn't have been possible. We've talked about how Megumi doesn't really have an end goal or much of a purpose, as well as the fact that he tends to get in his own way a lot. Personally, I think that this is what makes him likable. It makes him relatable, because most people today don't have a grand purpose they work their entire lives towards. For the entire first half of the story, there was no real mission for him to chase, just a vague goal of becoming stronger. In my opinion, many people nowadays are the same. We just go through life without passion just to try and get through each day in one piece, following whatever vague goal we might have. Be it studying for a degree, working a day job, or just living life the way it comes. In all honesty, that's something which makes Megumi relatable. He still works hard for his achievements, but most of the time, he doesn't selfishly try to achieve them. Like many people, he's a product of his surroundings, and like Gojo said, it's not a lack of trying that's a problem, but rather the fact that he doesn't know how to try. This resonates for me and probably many others. Seeing Megumi break out of his own self-defeating mindset allowed him to achieve great things, and I feel like that applies to anyone. As long as you attempt something and actually give it your all, the chance of failure shrinks significantly. Everyone watching JJK can take Megumi's development as a lesson to themselves. You don't need a concrete goal. It's fine to just float through life, but if you truly want to surpass your limits and achieve greatness, you've got to give it your all. This is more of an afterthought, but Megumi has a really interesting technique. The 10 Shadows is probably one of the most unique and versatile techniques in Jujutsu Kaisen, and that's why you want to see more of Megumi. The feeling of anticipation is only enforced by Gojo and Sukuna, who state that Megumi has the potential to become one of the strongest sorcerers in history, even to the levels of Satoru Gojo. This sets such high expectations for what Megumi is capable of and leads you to cheer him on in every battle and celebrate his every achievement because you just want to see how far he can go. If I had to concisely define Megumi as a character, I would say he's incredibly smart and almost terrifyingly logical. He may not let it show, but he is very much driven by his emotions, since he uses them as his primary motivation and he holds himself back the most. He himself presents a contradiction of action and ambition, serving as a contrast to other characters in the series, but most of all, Megumi lets you see a side of yourself, mirroring what it means to be human.